Well, as we get started, I have given some handouts to the ushers, so I'm going to just ask them to go ahead and get started with handing those out to everybody. Because as we have been mentioning to you, the book of Daniel is a prophetic book. There are historical facts and there are prophetic revelations. And within this book, there are overlaps. And as we mentioned to you, that there is a particular law when we talk about prophecy. It's called the law of double reference. And the law of double reference basically focuses on an immediate fulfillment or a close fulfillment, something that would happen possibly in the life of the person who received or gives the prophecy, and then something for the future, whether it is a distant future or a future just beyond where that person is living. And so what I've given you tonight, the handout that I have for you, as Pastor was sharing last week, we want to show you how Daniel is connected to Revelation. So there on the front part of the handout is chapter 7, the one we just finished last week. And I want to show you that the vision that Daniel had in chapter 7, verse 3, concerning the beast coming out of the sea, is fulfilled in Revelation chapter 13 as the beast, singular, comes out from the sea. So we see there an impression of something that happened immediately, because Daniel's 4 beasts represented 4 kingdoms. But in the book of Revelation, the beast is represented by the last kingdom, which is the kingdom of the Antichrist. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, it talked about the last beast that came forth had 10 horns. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 3, it talks about the beast, the dragon, who has 10 horns. Chapter 7, verse 8, it talks about that this last kingdom that comes up, that the man who rules in that kingdom has the eyes of a man and his mouth is speaking pompous words. Well, in Revelation, it gets more specific. Revelation 13:6, it says that this man, this Antichrist, opens his mouth and speaks blasphemy against God. Chapter 7, verse 9 says his hair of his head was like pure wool. Again, Revelation chapter 1, verse 14. John sees a man with a head and hair was white like wool. And 1,000 thousands, Daniel 7:10, minister to him. Likewise in Revelation 5:11, 10,000 times 10,000. And on it goes there on that list. Everything that Daniel saw had an immediate fulfillment, not just in his lifetime, but just beyond his lifetime. And then there was a future fulfillment that even we haven't yet seen. And the book of Revelation declares it. So I pray that that's helpful for you. But as you flip it over to the other side, there's a few more that we want to see as we get into chapter 8 of Daniel. In the 3rd year, verse 1, of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So, hey, he's saying another vision. So we're now looking at a second vision. So as the first vision revealed these 4 beasts and an immediate fulfillment, because remember, the 4 beasts represented Babylon, Persia, Greece, and ultimately Rome. But now in this second vision, there's a more focused look at 2 of these beasts. And as we said in verse 1, it says, this is in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. And if you remember, chapter 6 concluded with Belshazzar dying. So obviously we have an overlap here. But that's the way it is with prophecy. Prophecy operates with a view of what is happening, what will happen, what has happened, but sees forward. I saw in the vision, verse 2 says, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Now, just so you understand, I know some of these names are a little strange to you, but archaeologists found this citadel in the late 1800s. And on that citadel that he was at, the name Belshazzar was discovered, written in Babylonian script. Of course, they don't write the way that we do with the 26 letters of the alphabet. They wrote in a different type of script, but archaeologists found it. So this is not just a made-up place. It's a real place that has been found and uncovered to demonstrate that this word is true. Then I lifted my eyes and saw there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, and one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So what is he talking about here? What he's talking about is he's seeing the Persians. The ram had 2 horns. It was the Medes and the Persians who operated together to overthrow the Babylonian Empire. And the Persians came up second. Notice what it says here. 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Why? Because the Persians were stronger, more organized, and had more resources available to do war. So the Medes and the Persians came together in agreement and said, we're going to overthrow the Babylonians and anyone else who tries to stand against us. And so the ram began to push westward. And what that means is that they started moving towards Asia Minor, which is now today present Turkey. And then it says that not only did they go westward, but they also went northward. And what they did when they went northward was towards the Caspian Sea, which also makes up present day Russia. And then it says they went southward. And what was south? Babylonia, Israel, and Egypt. So as Daniel is watching, he's seeing the attack of the Persians against those empires that were at that very moment in control of this territory. And so as he's watching them, he says, so that no animal, verse 4, could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came up from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Now, I know we're looking at these things and thinking, I don't understand this Bible reading stuff. But let me help you to understand. And we'll see it later on in this chapter, but just so you kind of get an understanding, as the Medes and the Persians took over from the Babylonians, the next empire that took over from the Medes and the Persians were the Greeks. And it says that they came across the ground quickly, right? Doesn't it say that? It says they came across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Well, remember in the original vision, the first vision that Daniel had, Greece was represented by a leper. Have you ever seen a leper run? I mean, when they go to leap, boy, they go a long distance, don't they? Almost like they're not able to touch the ground. And sure enough, that's exactly the way that it went. Because remember, in the dream, the Persians were a bear. and a bear's not as agile or as swift as a leopard is. So when he's seeing this goat come across the whole earth, and it says that it has a notable horn between his eyes. Well, if you recall, who was the first Greek emperor who defeated more countries than anybody could ever perceive in his reign? Alexander. So what he's seeing is this vision of the Greek Empire overthrowing the Persian Empire. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with ferocious power. And as I saw him confronting the ram, he was moved with rage against him and attacked the ram and broke his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to withstand him. Well, again, you have to understand a little bit about history. The Persians were very, very vicious to anyone that they conquered or anyone that ever tried to challenge them. It's almost like ISIS today. Anybody that comes against them, they'll crucify them or burn them alive or bury them alive. Doesn't matter. But Alexander, when he had the opportunity, came against Persia in such a way that he was kind of working towards payback time. I'm going to get even with you all for what you did to our land, to what you did to our people, and we're going to get even with you. Some of you might remember a story, I guess it was a movie, not recently, 300. The 300 was about a group of Spartans who were working with the Greeks to challenge the Persians. Well, they did such a good job of slowing down the Persians that the Greeks were able to assemble an army that when the Persians tried to think they were going to try to overtake Greece, the Greeks overtook them. And so what Daniel is seeing is not something that was in his immediate future, but in the far future. Because he only lived into the Persian Empire under Darius. You remember? Had a little trip down into this little den where these king of the beasts were hanging out, waiting for dinner. And when Daniel showed up, they went, "Oh, bummer, we can't eat this one. We can't eat this one. All we can do is just kind of sit there and go, boy, that sure does look good." But they couldn't eat. And the reason being is that God closed their mouths. But when those who conspired against Daniel to get him thrown into the lion's den were cast in, we're told in the Word of God that they were eaten before they hit the floor. Devoured, and their bones were broken. Not just the men, but their wives and children as well, too. And Daniel was put into a place of high honor. And so it was that when the Greeks had the opportunity to come against the Persians, they tore at him. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So verse 8 tells us, "Therefore the male goat grew very great, and when he became strong, the large horn was broken." And I think I shared with you that the Greek Empire extended all the way east to India and into Africa and up into the southern area that is ultimately would become Europe. And Alexander was, unfortunately, a young man when he died from alcohol poisoning. Got a little too much. And at 33, he died. But after he died, there were 4 other leaders that took over his throne. And notice, Daniel is shown that. "Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken. And in place of it, 4 notable horns came up towards the 4 winds of heaven." Well, the 4 leaders under Alexander that took over literally took over all the territory, north, south, east, and west. They covered those areas. That's why it says the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn that grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and toward the glorious land. Now, I'm sorry I don't have a map, but if you were to consider where Greece is in southeastern Europe, and if you go directly south from that into the Mediterranean Sea, notice it says that it went south, and then it went towards the east. You know where it was going to? It says to the glorious land. You know what the glorious land is? Israel. Israel. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Now you might be thinking to yourself, who is this? Well, this is one of the leaders that had taken over the territory from Alexander. Seleucus was his name. Well, he had a great-great-grandson who took over his part of the kingdom, and he hated the Jews, disliked them completely. And it was his desire to do whatever he could. So this little horn that grew up, this great-great-grandson of Seleucus, turned his anger against the Jews. And it says he cast some of the stars to the ground. Now, I know you might be thinking, stars to the ground, Dr. Seymour? Well, you can keep your finger there in Daniel chapter 8. Go back to Genesis chapter 15, just in case it might sound familiar to you. In Genesis chapter 15, look at verse 5. And he, the Lord, brought Abram outside and said, look now towards heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. So Antiochus Epiphanes, the great-great-grandson of Seleucus, literally tore those stars apart, the ones that were Jewish. Chapter 22, just to make sure, it's not just Dr. Seymour saying it, but the Word of God is declaring it. And Jesus did say, out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter is established. Genesis 22, look at verse 17. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven. And as the sand which is on the seashore, your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. And so what happened is that the descendant of Seleucus came against these people. But it wasn't just for that immediate future of Daniel. Keep your finger there in Daniel now and turn all the way over to Revelation. And notice what it says in Revelation chapter 12. In a battle that went on in heaven. Revelation 12, verse 4. It's talking about a great fiery red dragon. I wonder who this might be. Could it be the one that Isaiah and Ezekiel said was the star of the morning, known as the beautiful one, Lucifer? Verse 4. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Satan took 1/3 of the host of heaven to go with him. So as Daniel is seeing this vision, he is seeing not only what Antiochus Epiphanes was going to do to the Jews, but he was seeing what the devil had tried to do as well against the host of heaven, against God. So Daniel is seeing an immediate and a future and a past experience. And he even, going back to Daniel now, chapter 8. And by the way, if you notice on your handout, that was one of the prophecies. Chapter 8, verse 11. And he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. Remember, I shared with you last week, there's going to be a time when the Antichrist will rise to power. See, Antiochus, before he took over, gave liberty to the Jews, in the same way that the Antichrist will give liberty to the Jews to rebuild the temple, to restore the sacrifice that they do in the temple. But halfway through a 7-year time period, he will change his mind. Because of the transgression, an army was given to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices and cast truth down to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. That's because he's been given the freedom and the liberty to attack. And in case you are not familiar with the man's name, Antiochus Epiphanes is the great-great-great-grandson of Seleucus. The name Epiphanes means God manifest. I'm God, and you will worship me, is what his name declares. And he stood in opposition to all that was God. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Now, if you aren't really quick with math, and I'm not great either, so I had to figure it out on my own, but 2,300 days is roughly 7 years. The 7 years of the tribulation. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And you might remember this from last week. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. And he said to me, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. So as Daniel got the prophecy of his immediate future, Gabriel declared to him, what you are seeing is even going to be beyond what you see. It's actually beyond where we are right now. It's our future. And Gabriel, now he was speaking with me, and I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me, and he stood me upright, and he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. Now remember when Jesus said to his disciples about the temple was going to be destroyed, and not one block, not one brick would be on top of the other? And they all said, when will that be? He said, I can't tell you that, but I can give you some signs. So in the same way, we're getting the signs that Daniel saw as Gabriel interprets. The ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that is between its eyes is the first king, Alexander. And as for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Now that's a statement to consider. Not with its power. In other words, its anger against the Jews and against the land that God declared would be his people's. Someone else wants to see that land destroyed. So who could possibly be the one who will give power to this horn? But Lucifer himself, as he manifests his evil in the life of the Antichrist. And I know you only hear about that word. I mean, a lot of people who talk about prophecy talk about that word a lot. But something that we need to understand. It's only used in the New Testament, in one of John's letters. Roughly, I think 4 times it's used. But the thing that we have to understand is that there are other terms that relate to him. You might remember the man of lawlessness. You might even remember the son of perdition. The son of perdition was used to betray Jesus. Where did he get his power from? What motivated him? But Satan. Because Satan realized that Jesus was the one that God told him about way back in the garden. He's going to bruise your head, and a head wound is fatal. So he did what he could throughout history to destroy males. And he's done a pretty good job in the United States too, don't you know? He got a law passed in 1973 that said it's okay to kill babies at any point in pregnancy. Bet you didn't know that. Roe v. Wade made abortion legal at any point in pregnancy. You might have thought that a third trimester abortions were only done recently in the last, since the 20th century, the last 40 years. But no, they were legal all the way back to 1973. And in case you ever heard the term partial birth abortion, I won't go into the detail. But what you have to understand is that they birth the baby feet first. And then the doctor does something with a pair of scissors. And before the baby is all the way out, he scrambles his brains. And that's legal. Today, it's legal. There's no law against it. And we're paying money. Your tax dollars. Hey, isn't that exciting? But see, God told us we have to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Caesar becomes accountable for us being obedient. And they'll have to deal with God when it comes time for him to judge the world. In the same way that the Antichrist will be judged. But not with its power. Verse 23. Well, wait a minute. I want to show you something again. In verse 17, I want to just back up a little bit. In verse 17 here, he says, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. That's another one of the prophecies that you'll see in Revelation chapter 1, verse 19. The Lord speaks to John and he says in Revelation 1:19, write the things which you have seen. In other words, he's talking to John. You're an old man. At this point, John is like Daniel, probably in his 80s or 90s. So he's seen a lot. In the 3.5 years he was with Jesus and then afterwards, and realized that he's the only one that did not die a martyr's death. He died of old age. All the rest of them were killed. And he was ultimately released from the Isle of Patmos and went to Ephesus, and where we believe that's where he died. So when Jesus says to him, write the things that you have seen, there's a lot he's seen. And then he says, and the things which are, in other words, the stuff that you know about right now, what's happening this very minute. And then he says, and the things which will take place after this. So as Daniel was being shown something for the far future, ours included, so was John. He was being shown the future. Now, back down to verse 23 of Daniel chapter 8. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. Whoa. A king shall arise, having fierce features. In other words, his countenance will even cause people to get nervous. Kind of like mom and dad when they've called you by all three of your names. And you knew, uh-oh, if I don't show up now, I'm dead meat. But this man, the Antichrist, has such fierce features. And he understands sinister schemes. Why? Because he's operating in that power. And so what literally is happening here is that we are seeing that this Antichrist isn't just some kind of dumb idiot, kind of, oh, okay, I'll do whatever you say, Satan. Yeah, sure. No, what this means And as a matter of fact, if you're not familiar with the name Dwight Pentecost, but he was a Bible scholar. He was professor emeritus at Dallas Theological Seminary and taught Bible exposition. And prophecy was one of his main subjects. And he said in these last 4, 5 verses, we're going to see the characteristics of the Antichrist. First of all, in verse 23, he understands sinister schemes. What's that saying to us? That he's intelligent and he's persuasive. He can convince people. Have we seen folks over the years that have operated that same way? There was a guy, if I remember, somewhere in Europe who could understand sinister schemes and literally took over a whole country and then thought he'd take over the whole world. And was doing a pretty good job of it until he got a little overwhelmed with his power and went crazy. But there was also another power, just as it says in verse 24. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive, and he shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. So what are we seeing here? What we're seeing here is that this one is not operating on his own power. The Antichrist is not operating in his own power. He's operating under the influence of Lucifer. Okay, I'll use the other name, Satan. He's operating under his influence. And what he is doing is he's using that influence to cause other people to submit to him. Notice it says, he shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Who are the holy people? The Jews. His anger and hostility will be against the Jews, but there'll also be another group of people who he'll be angry with. Because if you recall, during the time of the tribulation, and if you're not familiar, then I'm going to give you some additional information here, but what will happen during the time of the tribulation, that the Jews will become witnesses. And they'll be used by God, 144,000 of them. I'm sorry, it's not the Jehovah Witnesses. You read Revelation, it's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. 12 times 12,000, 144,000. They're not Jehovah Witnesses, they're Jews. Plain and simple. And what are they? They are anointed by God along with 2 other witnesses. Now, I'm just going to leave that part right there. That will be used by God to witness to people and tell them about Jesus and tell them that what's going on right now is something that Jesus had declared was going to occur, something that Daniel prophesied concerning, and now it's happening, and we haven't seen it yet, but it's our future. And those 144,000 witnesses will bring Gentiles into the kingdom, and the Antichrist will hate them too, because he'll demand that they take his mark if they want to buy or sell. But the witnesses remind everybody, there's only one God, and him only do we serve. And as it says in Revelation chapter 12, they did not love their life, but were willing to die. The testimony. So Daniel, well, let's just keep your finger there, but let me show you. Revelation chapter 17. Sometimes I try to put the paper clips in there, Pastor, and sometimes I don't get them all in the right spot. But if you'll notice what it says in Revelation chapter 17, go down to verse 13. And these are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. And these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. But understand, before the Lamb comes, he will have authority for 7 years. And for 3.5 of those years, he will have outright war. As it says there in verse 24, he'll destroy the mighty and the holy people. Verse 25, and through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. He shall exalt himself in his heart, and he shall destroy many in their prosperity. And he shall even rise against, notice what it says, the prince of princes. Now, if your translation is done appropriately, if you look at that verse, notice that the prince, first one, is capital. Why is it capital? Because it relates to God, the Prince of Princes. He will exalt himself above them. Now, in case you're not familiar with what happened under Antiochus Epiphanes, the great-great-grandson of Seleucus, at a certain point in his rule, he decided that he was going to declare himself to be God, and he set up an idol in the temple and began to sacrifice pigs in the Holy of Holies as a way of declaring he's God and who he serves is God. But there was a group of men under a man by the name of John Maccabee who decided, we're not having this. And they rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes. And they overcame him. And in case you're not familiar, that happened in 163 BC. And a very incredible thing happened after they got the victory. And they were able to clean and purify the temple once again. When they went to go light the lampstand, there was just enough oil to light that lampstand 7 times, 8 times. And since 163 BC, the Jews have celebrated that victory in the Feast of Hanukkah. And that same event will occur again when the Antichrist decides he will be worshiped in the temple and will set himself up and declare that everybody will worship him as God and no one else can be worshiped. Hasn't happened yet, but that's the future. And that's what Daniel saw. He shall rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. He might raise to power with a false sense of security, but he's going to be taken down. Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19. Verses 19 and 20. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. And these two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So just in case you're a little concerned about how long will this go on, just understand there is an end to this story. And the Antichrist will not be victorious forever. Going back to Daniel 8:25, and he shall be broken without human means. Verse 26, and the vision of the evenings and the mornings which was told, notice here, this is Gabriel explaining the vision that Daniel just had, is true. The messenger of God, Gabriel, the same one who told Zacharias that he was going to have a son, and that son was going to be the forerunner of the Messiah, the same Gabriel who went to Mary and said, virgin young girl, you're going to give birth to a baby. The same Gabriel who visited her betrothed husband, Joseph, and said, don't be afraid to marry her, because what's inside of her is conceived by the Holy Spirit. That same Gabriel said to Daniel, this is true. And everything from that time forward that the messenger of God has declared to be true, has it been true? Has it come to pass? Does that mean that there is still some things yet to occur that we have to understand and have the confidence to trust that God's on the throne and these things will come to pass? Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick and was sick for days. And afterwards I arose and went about the king's business, and I was astonished by the vision, and no one understood it. Daniel's kind of like, yes, sir, and went about his business as he was supposed to, as a servant of the king. Belshazzar, because Belshazzar's still king. The Babylonian Empire is still in control, and he's serving in his court. But he's got this on the inside of him. Now, I know those of us who are believers, and I'm trusting that it's every one of us in this room, that you have inside of you the same vision of the future, of the enemy being defeated once and for all and cast into the lake of fire and will no longer be a problem to you. You won't need glasses. You won't need canes. You won't need medications. You won't need the IRS. You won't need the president. All you'll have is the Lord Jesus Christ and his kingdom. But we're not there yet. So Daniel had to walk around with all of this bottled up on the inside of him. But we already heard and been challenged by the man of the house. We need to be telling people what we know. Because the way that people are freaking out these days, suicide is back on the increase. And not just with kids, but older people. They can't take it anymore. I mean, yeah, you go to every city in the United States and there's at least 6 oldie stations. Why? Because they like it when it was cool, calm, and collected back in those days. That's why we like oldies. But the problem is that even the oldies aren't working anymore. So people are committing suicide. But you have the truth on the inside of you. Daniel had it, and he kept going about doing what he was supposed to do. As a matter of fact, it says in verse 26, it said, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. In the book of Ezekiel, keep your finger there again, Daniel 8:26, but look into Ezekiel, chapter 12. God didn't just say this to Daniel so that we would understand there's a reality here concerning this vision. Look at verse 27. Son of man, look, the house of Israel is saying, the vision that he sees is for many days from now. And he prophesies of times far off. It's the future. It's not for now. There's a promise that God gives to us. Look at Daniel chapter 12. This is the conclusion of the book that we'll be getting at in a few weeks. But look at Daniel chapter 12. Verse 9. And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the end of time. I'm sorry, verse 8. Did you do 8? Sorry, brother. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? Okay, remember when Jesus told his disciples that the fact that the temple was going to be destroyed? And they said, when will that be? And he says, you don't know. I don't know. Only the Father knows. But I can tell you a few things to be watching for. So as Daniel's going, Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So literally, Daniel has to take the last vision that we'll see as we continue in our study of Daniel. As he was seeing this vision, this second vision, and Gabriel was explaining it to him, he's thinking, okay, when is this going to happen? Can you tell me when's this going to happen? And he said, seal it up. It's not for you to know the details. Put it into a scroll and hold on to it. You know when it will occur? Look at Revelation again, chapter 5. Revelation chapter 5, verse 1. And I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll, written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look at it. So I wept much, because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals." And I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and he took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And the rest of Revelation provides us the details. But all we can do now is just remember, that's our future. Between now and then, what's our responsibility? To be faithful, to do the thing that God has left us here to do. And that is, tell somebody. Got to tell somebody what Jesus is going to do for us.